The Lion King 2019 is one of the worst movies of 2019 so far, and without a doubt the worst of the Disney live-action remakes yet. I know that's a really bold claim to start this video with, but I really can't remember the last time I went to see a movie and gained absolutely nothing from seeing it. I went into this movie with extremely low expectations, and I guess that really speaks for how terrible it is because I was still disappointed by what I ended up getting. I'm sure you've probably heard this from a lot of people by now, but I'm really not a fan of the live-action remakes currently dominating Disney's production. Not because they're the worst and most horribly written movies that Disney has ever put out, far from it, but the real problem with these remakes is that they represent an increasing sense of laziness going on at the company. Now that they're hell-bent on turning the entertainment industry into a monopoly, their main focus seems to be making as much money as possible each year. Now this isn't normally a bad thing, obviously companies need money in order to operate, but when it comes at the expense of any form of artistic integrity, there comes a time where you really just need to stop and think about what you're doing to your image. Just watching the trailers for this movie, I could already tell that they weren't even trying with this one. It literally looked just like a shot-for-shot copy of the animated version. Even the music they played over it is straight from the soundtrack of the original film. It all just looked like anything you could have gotten from simply watching the animated version at home, but without the expressive colors and atmosphere. And when you're making a successor to one of the most beautifully made animated movies in cinema, this really isn't something that would be considered acceptable. In comparison, the trailers for the Aladdin remake looked much more promising. It was obviously lacking in certain areas compared to the original, but it at least looked like they were trying to make this movie fun. The actors seemed in character, the set pieces looked convincing, and the dancing and choreography that went into the musical numbers was admittedly impressive. In comparison, The Lion King isn't even making an attempt. The CGI had a really slow-looking energy to it that just made the film feel lifeless. Whenever I saw new footage or a new trailer for this movie, I was always hoping for something, just something that would give me the impression that they were trying, and every single time I was left feeling nothing but boredom. And yet there was still this small part of me believing that maybe, just maybe, the trailers are deceiving. Maybe they don't represent the final product, and if I go see it, I'll be pleasantly surprised. But when I went to see it, I was not surprised in the slightest. This film gave me exactly what I thought I was going to get. So what's the story? Well, honestly, I don't really think I should bother recapping anything that happens in the story, because there's literally nothing that happens in this movie that I couldn't say about the 1994 original. That's how lazy this remake is. When it comes to people who defend the live-action remakes because they may have a soft spot for them, they usually complain about people saying that it's just a retrend of the original. And I will admit that it's a criticism that's used a lot with these movies, even in cases where it's not exactly true. But in this case, I mean no joke when I say that The Lion King 2019 is an exact scene-by-scene imitation of the animated version. Just about every shot in this movie and the way that the story is paced is made to be an imitation of the animated version. There might be one tiny difference here and there, but nothing major enough to distinct it from its predecessor. This is beyond predictable. This is like seeing into the future and knowing exactly what's going to happen and not being surprised by anything because it's not gonna catch you off guard. That's basically the movie in a nutshell. But even if you take out the story just being a rehash, there's still nothing else to like about it because everything else feels so wearisome. The setting, special effects, acting, and even the music just feel very watered down. And with nothing to distract you from how vacuous the story is, it just makes the entire thing fall apart. The acting, for starters, feels very one-note. The line reads just sound really tired and lacking in enthusiasm. Everyone sounds like they're just generically reading off the script a lot of the time. And any times they try to emote more feel really over the top and sporadic. It just shits all over beloved performances like Robert Guillamune as Rafiki, or Nathan Lane and Ernie Sabella as Timon and Pumbaa. For God's sake, how the hell did you make Donald Glover less expressive than Matthew Broderick? I don't know, but they managed to find a way. I'd rather watch Broderick's performance as Inspector Gadget over this. At least his wonky and childish faces gave me some kind of reaction. Even James Earl Jones just sounds really tired reading these lines, which should be impossible considering that they're lines that he should be very familiar with by now. And personally, I just find it really scummy that they got James Earl Jones back to reprise his role when they didn't bother to get any of the other original voice actors to return. It feels like they wanted to create a new cast, but also just bring back James Earl Jones solely to get extra brownie points from people's nostalgia for the original. I can understand not getting Jonathan Taylor Thomas to reprise his role as young Simba because, Well, he's 37 years old now. But really? You couldn't get Jeremy Irons, Moira Kelly, Rowan Atkinson, Cheech Marin, Jim Cummings, and Whoopi Goldberg? If you really want to toggle at people's nostalgia by recasting James Earl Jones, at least try to go all the way with it. But no, we have to cast Beyoncé as Nala because she's a big-name celebrity, regardless of how miscasted it feels. Seriously, do you really think that the people behind the original movie intended for this character to be associated with the woman who sang all the single ladies? But that's nothing compared to the utter rubbish the CGI is. It completely fails to recreate the feeling that the original 2D animation had. Not because it's 3D, but because it's really draining to look at. There've been a lot of movies in the past, and even this year, that have pulled off 3D animation very well. And this wasn't one of those movies. They went for a photorealistic style, and it clearly shows in all the ways the movie wanted to make the animals as realistic as possible. And while it does look realistic, there's far too many drawbacks. Because the movie is trying to look as realistic as possible, it loses the expression the animated version had. The facial expressions for about 90% of the movie are flat and really somber. They can't emote any form of expression beyond just making blank stares, and the movements of their mouths are heavily restricted, further limiting the expression. I keep trying to think of a moment in the movie where the animals actually smile, but they just carry the same photorealistic look on their face the whole time. The way the characters were designed in the original movie shows how they were intended for 2D animation because the art style was adaptable to the story. It was able to visually assist a movie about singing, dancing, emotional animals because they were less concerned with making the animals realistic and more about making them express and emote. These photorealistic models don't really fit with the tone the story is going for. During some of the most intense and emotional moments in the story, like Mufasa's death or Simba talking with his father about being brave after he got in trouble at the elephant graveyard, they just have this blank stare when they're supposed to be expressive. Something that would allow the audience to feel more invested in what's happening on screen. For example, in the original film during the wildebeest stampede, the animated version is able to capture all of the emotions that Simba would be feeling in this situation. Shock, horror, fear, anxiety, and desperation. You end up feeling what Simba is feeling because the 2D style was able to convey all of these emotions properly. It felt like I was actually scared for Simba's life as opposed to the film telling me I should be scared for him. But in this live-action remake during the stampede, Simba just looks completely bored and uninvested in his situation. Kid, you're going to get trampled by a horde of wildebeests. At least pretend to look like you're scared of the looming possibility of death. And this is a problem throughout the entire film. None of the characters are able to pull off the right facial expressions because the photorealism won't let them do it. It strips away whatever emotion the character should be feeling, and it further takes away from what made the original so great. The reason why the 2D animation worked so well was because it had a huge range of expression, and it was complemented by the particular character designs. There was a visible artistic direction in the animation, and there were no limits to what they could pull off. The photorealistic style of this live-action remake does have these limits. By making them as realistic as possible, they also remove the ability to express themselves like a character is supposed to. But if you want to go even further, let's use a different comparison. Like the Detective Pikachu movie. That movie had much more expressive characters and the CGI had more energy to it. Sure, the Pokemon looked like creepypasta nightmare fuel, but it ended up playing in the film's favor. They weren't concerned with making the Pokemon look as realistic as possible and went for a more surreal approach. And as a result, the Pokemon look much more convincing because the style they went for allowed them to be more expressive. They didn't look like real animals because they wanted to stay true to the original designs and it allowed them to have more character. When they wanted to make Pikachu smile or get angry or look scared, they were able to pull it off. I can't remember a single moment in this remake where they made Simba look like he was smiling or getting angry or looking scared. He just looks like he's staring at a wall watching paint dry. All of the characters have the same facial expression for almost the entire movie, and it gets really old really quickly. I'd even go so far as to say that making the animals realistic made them even creepier than the designs from Detective Pikachu. I mean, what do you think is more appealing to look at? This or this? Well, obviously this one, because the other one looks like it wants to eat my soul. The original Lion King wasn't made to be realistic, and its story benefited from that, as the animation provided emotion that couldn't be captured with any other art style. The photorealism of this remake doesn't even come close. Any resemblance of emotion is simply not present here. It's a big problem because The Lion King was an extremely emotional movie, and it's difficult to get this across with the limitation of realistic designs. And because the CGI has little to no expression, the film ends up relying on limited animal body language, which gets really stale after a while. And considering there are real-life animals that emote more than the CGI in this film, there is literally no excuse for the photorealism to be this boring. It's not even impressive photorealism. It just looks like the unused special effects from Life of Pi. And the cinematography is honestly not much better. I mean, sure, there's some nice footage of Africa, but that's it. There's really nothing to say about it except that it's footage of Africa. This movie really does feel like one of those Disney nature documentaries, as there's nothing unique or interesting to say about the film's atmosphere. For all the problems the Beauty and the Beast remake had, it at least had the distinction of actually being made in live action, with real people and real places instead of just a bunch of CGI. You can see the time and effort that went into recreating these set pieces, especially the castle, which is just really gorgeous to explore. The dancing looked like a lot of time and practice went into the musical numbers, and it just felt more real because you had actual actors interacting with the atmosphere of the film. The Lion King doesn't even have that going for it. It just looks like they filmed some footage of Africa and pasted some CGI over it. It's not even shot in an interesting way. There's no cool techniques or interesting perspectives or any sort of cool angles. It's just footage of Africa with CGI animals. The shot composition in this remake is really lacking in expression, which shouldn't even be possible with the budget that this film was made on. And in spite of being framed and written to have the exact same story as the animated version, the pacing is painfully slow. Now obviously the live action version was gonna have a longer runtime, but it feels like they're just dragging scenes that don't need to be extended. They're needlessly stretched out in order to make the story seem longer and more ambitious than it actually is. Almost like they took the original movie and played it at half the speed. And it really just irks me that they did the exact same things as the original while somehow making it lifeless and limited. The Hakuna Matata scene is especially upsetting because they're just casually walking instead of dancing to the rhythm of the music. In the original, the trio was actually dancing and strutting to the music, swinging their heads and marching and really looking like they're having a really fun time. There was a sense of body language in this scene that really got the expression across, making the song number all the more fun to watch. Looking at these two versions back to back, the remake has absolutely no energy to it. They literally cared so little that they didn't even make an attempt. It just rips the emotion and character out of the scene. To remake such an iconic scene into something so lifeless and lackluster is just unacceptable. The Hakuna Matata scene is like the perfect summary of this remake. It's the exact same goddamn thing, but somehow remade to be boring and unappealing. It tries so hard to make itself into the superior alternative to the animated version, and it just falls flat on so many levels. They banked so much on the realism of the CGI as its selling point and took a huge shit on everything else. I mean, do we actually even need a remake of this movie? There's little to nothing to improve or fix. It's one of the most beloved animated movies of all time, and for good reason. It was a mixing of the story of Hamlet and the coming-of-age formula, but done in a way that was big in scope and really transcended cinema. The music was epic, its characters memorable and likable, and the story of Simba overcoming his fears and doubts and growing into a king who would become a greater leader than his father was really endearing. It wasn't the fact that it was animated, it was that it was using the medium to tell a grand story with some nice lessons. And in turn, it helped push forward the possibilities of animation and expanded on the medium. It felt like a project that had a lot of heart, passion, and effort put into its creation. I can't say any of that for this live-action remake. It doesn't feel like it was made with love and compassion or any intention of pushing forward the boundaries of film and storytelling. It feels like it was made just to cash in on Disney's previous successes and people's nostalgia for the original. And if you're really so nostalgic for the original, why don't you just watch it at home for free, instead of paying $10 to $20 to watch it in a movie theater? Not to mention the extra money you have to pay for gas to drive to the theater and buy the popcorn and soda. Doesn't sound like a good idea now, does it? The original Lion King showed the passion and dedication that the filmmakers put into it to bring forth a beautiful form of animation. This remake is just a shameful cash grab that does the original no justice. I know it seems I've been harsh on this movie a lot for just being a copy of the animated version, but that's exactly the problem. If this was just something that was on its own, it probably wouldn't be so bad, but it's not a standalone movie. It's a remake to a huge icon in the animation industry. It's supposed to live up to the legacy of this huge giant from Disney's prime. If this movie is just going to be an exact copy of the original, then you should expect it to be treated as such. They didn't care about living up to the legacy of the 1994 version, they just wanted to make money off of it. In all the interviews and behind-the-scenes videos, they keep talking about how great the original was and how they want to reimagine it for people who grew up with it. They're not trying to introduce this story to a new generation of audiences who didn't get a chance to see it on the big screen. They're aiming specifically for the 90s kids who grew up with it. And even if you want to share this movie with your your kids or the youth of this generation that missed out on it, just show them the original movie because that was made with a sense of heart. This reimagining has no heart to it whatsoever. It's soulless, shameless, and another tiring example of Disney's desire to abandon the very thing that made them special in the first place. Remember the ending to Meet the Robinsons and how the entire moral of the movie was how we need to keep moving forward? A quote by Walt Disney himself? This isn't moving forward, this is moving back in time while somehow being stuck in the present. If Walt were to come back to life and see what Disney is trying to do to all of these beloved classics that he helped bring to life, he'd suffer a stroke and die again. It's a real shame because I heard how Jon Favreau, the director of The Jungle Book 2016, was the director of this remake. I was really impressed with his work on The Jungle Book because he was faithful to the original story without trying to turn it into a shameless cash grab. So his work on this movie just made me sit back and ask myself, what the hell was he thinking?
I'm entering into Lion King, inheriting all that I learned on Jungle Book. There was a tremendous opportunity to retell the story using a new set of tools and a new technology.
Bullshit!
This remake just goes against everything the original movie stood for. Gone is the talented voice acting, vibrant colors, focused pacing, expressive animation, memorable designs, and the timeless feel of the story because it's just a fucking clone of something we already have but somehow watered down so badly that it might as well not even exist. Even the song numbers just fall really flat with the music sounding flimsy and the singing coming across as tone deaf. It doesn't feel faithful to the source material because of how tedious it is, and the message about what makes a good leader and a bad leader ends up getting ham-fisted. There's way too much exposition and show don't tell with Mufasa's and Scar's actions in this movie. The original did a lot more showing and Mufasa's words of wisdom were shorter and simpler. We don't need this drawn-out speech that the remake is doing to get the message across. I'm probably gonna get some hate for saying this, but I'm gonna say it anyway. The Secret Life of Pets 2 was a better movie than this hot garbage. At least it was expressive and colorful and kinda funny, and it wasn't trying to turn a beloved classic into such a shameless cash grab. And when I'm recommending an Illumination movie over a Disney one, it really shows the severity of the situation they're in with these remakes. The facial expressions have little to no energy, forcing the movie to rely on the voice acting to carry all the dead weight. But the voice acting sounds like something out of the original Resident Evil games. The slower pacing doesn't do anything to elevate the story, and in spite of having a longer runtime and having the exact same narrative, it has far less substance than the original. It tries so desperately to look bigger and more grand than the original when it's not even worthy of the table scraps of the direct-to-video sequel. As a standalone movie, it's a complete waste of time. As a remake to one of the biggest names in film history, it's an utter slap to the face. There is no reason for this movie to exist as it fails to be a worthy successor to the original and even fails at trying to be its own thing. It tries so hard to be exactly like the original that it can't be its own thing. And I really wish to God that this utterly bombs at the box office so that Disney will finally stop doing these godforsaken remakes and actually move forward as Walt Disney himself intended. It's more than just a bad remake. It's a disgrace.